Hello, I'm going to try to read my book again. Everybody told me there was no audio, so I went through and restarted my computer and did everything. So we'll see if it works this time. But thank you for joining me, and we'll see what happens. Blackwood Manor. Anthony returned to tell Alexander what he had found out. As he walked into the foyer, he could hear loud screams. He followed the screams into the dungeon cavern. As he entered, he could see Alexander standing next to a young female vampire. She has a silver collar around her neck, and she is covered with lash marks from one of Alexander's silver whips. There are about 20 other coven members standing around watching the torture. "What is all of this about, Alexander?" Anthony asked. "Great, Anthony. I'm glad you're back. This sweet little thing thinks she can do anything that she wants without consequences." Alexander seems very excited about what he's doing. As he replied, Anthony thought to himself as he watched the madness, Alexander has started to do more terrible things and more often since Garrison's death, that I must do something before he goes too far and destroys this coven. I've worked too hard to build this empire to just let Alexander ruin everything. So what did she do, may I ask? Well, she took it upon herself to become a maker. She doesn't care about what her master thinks is best for his coven, Alexander angrily answered as he grabbed her by the chin firmly. She left her team and went to a party and picked up a snack. She was sloppy and didn't finish him off, he continued as he threw Julie to the floor. Now I have a young vampire out there somewhere, and I may never find him because he didn't go through the rituals. Alexander punched her in the face. "I'm so sorry, Master," Julie screamed out. He shouted back, "I don't care how sorry you are, Julie. That can never make up for what you've done to this coven." He walked around Julie a few times and then told Dana, a tall, slender woman with long brown hair, to get him the silver acid. Darn it, I'm sorry. "Alex, is this really necessary?" Anthony asked while trying to defuse the situation. "I feel it is, Anthony. Do not interfere." Dana walked over to Alexander with the bottle of acid and handed it to him. He put on a pair of gloves to protect himself from the acid mixture. "Put her on the table, Dusty," he yelled. Dusty's a very tall and lanky vampire. Anthony walked over to Alexander and put his hand on the lid of the bottle. "Alexander, I need to talk to you right now," Anthony demanded. "What could you have to tell me that's more important than this matter?" He put down the bottle of acid. "This better be worth it." Anthony walked out of the dungeon cavern and headed toward the study. Alexander took off his gloves and turned to leave. "Chain her back up, Dusty. I'll be right back." When Alexander entered the study, Anthony is sitting in front of the fireplace. He walked over to the fireplace and sat down in the other chair. "All right, tell me what you found out." "Jeanette's sister is in the Banshee Theater Company. Sinner, the uncles of the girls, has sold their home and disappeared. I'm getting closer to finding her, Alexander. Please try to stay in control of your temper. Find something that can relieve your stress level. Maybe I should send for Erica Salant. She always had a way with you." "That's the best idea I've heard from you in a long time, Anthony," Alexander arrogantly replied. "I will send for her tonight," as he tried to act like he could care less the way Alexander talked to him. "Just stay in here with me for a little while, just until you have a chance to calm down. This Julie might have done you a favor." "What the hell are you talking about?" Alexander asked. "You said that she's having visions from this young male vampire, right? If you kill her, you can't use her to help you sort out the visions. Make her figure out who's who for you. She might even be able to read his mind once he learns to use his powers." "You might have a point. I did let my emotions get in the way on this one. Thank you for bringing it to my attention." Anthony doesn't know how much longer he can put up with Alexander's childish outbursts. He thought to himself, "I just need to get a few more witches and warlocks looking for Akashi, Each day that I must put up with this kind of bullshit, it makes it harder to wait. He poured himself a glass of cognac and a glass of wine for himself. He opened the box of cigars and retrieved one for each of them. They both sat down and lit their cigars. Alexander leaned back in his chair and turned his head toward Anthony and asked, "So how is Catalina?" "She's fine, and why would you bring her up now?" Anthony responded with a little disdain. "Well, she is your daughter, Anthony, after all. Don't get mad at me if talking about your mistakes hurts your feelings." Alexander maliciously dug at him in spite. "I love my daughter," Anthony replied sternly. Alexander nodded his head as he put down his drink with a smirk on his face. The Teutonic. Sandra returned to the stateroom with a couple of books under her arm for her sister. As she opened the door, Jeanette quickly pulled her in and closed the door. Sandra turned and saw Christian sitting in the easy chair. He quickly stood up with his hands down by his side. "Who are you?" she asked. "This is Christian DuPont, Sandra. I found him feeding on rats in one of the storerooms near the bottom of the ship. He's going to be visiting us for the rest of the trip," Jeanette answered with a little too much enthusiasm. "Jeanette, he can't stay in our room. It's not proper," she said while she shook her head no. "We can tell people that he's our cousin. He has nowhere else to go." "I can see that, Jeanette. Where are his clothes?" Christian stood there wearing Jeanette's undergarments. "Well, he needed to bathe and he didn't have any other clothes to wear. I made him one of your drinks and I told him that we would help him, Sandra." Christian, feeling bad for putting Jeanette in this situation, said, "I will leave. I didn't mean to cause any problems," and he picked up his dirty clothes and walked toward the bathroom so he could put them back on. "No, Christian, I'm sorry. Where are my manners?" "We are going to help you. Jeanette, get my tape measure. I'm going to need a few measurements to take to the ship's tailor." Jeanette retrieved a tape measure from her sewing bag. She handed it to her sister and hugged her. "Christian, hold up your arms." He lifted his arms and smiled. She measured his arms and his inseam, and then she measured his foot. After she was finished, she made him an amulet to wear before she left to go buy him his suit. After Sandra left, Jeanette took out a pair of scissors and told Christian to sit on the floor. She got down on her knees behind him to cut his hair. When she was finished, she announced, "You clean up very nicely, Christian." She grabbed a small hand broom and swept the hair up off the floor. Christian retrieved the small trash bin beside the desk and brought it to her. After they were done cleaning up the mess, they walked into the bathroom and Christian looked at himself in the mirror. Jeanette stood beside him and looked at herself too. Christian asked, "I thought vampires couldn't see their reflection in the mirror." "I wondered about that too, but Sandra told me that that's just a fable. But I've been having horrible nightmares. I keep seeing myself as a disgusting creature in a mirror. I asked my sister what it meant, and she told me, you see your reflection this way because it's the vampire in you. It wants to cross over and give for you to give in to your dark urges." "I'm glad that God kept me from feeding on people," Christian stated. They walked back into the stateroom and sat down. "Sandra should be back soon," Jeanette said, as there was a knock at the door. She knew that Sandra would not knock. Jeanette told Christian to hide in the bathroom. She opened the door just enough to see who it was. "Oh my goodness, it's Fredrick," Jeanette revealed as she opened the door wider. "Oh, Fredrick, it's so good of you to come by and see Sandra and me. What are the odds of you being on the same ship?" She reached out to hug him. Fredrick grabbed both her hands before she could hug him. "Jeanette," he said with surprise. She pulled him into the stateroom. Sandra walked up to the door just as Jeanette was shutting it. She walked in and was surprised to see Fredrick. "What are you doing here?" Fredrick Desmond. Fredrick is 23 when he became a white warlock. He is 6 foot tall, blonde, and very handsome. He's a member of the High Council in the Banshee Order. He fell in love with Sandra within a few months after her coming to work at the theater. After Sarnia's death, he made sure that Sandra took every class that she could to improve her skills. He's very protective of Sandra. He grabbed her around the waist and pulled her close to him. "Thank God you're alive." "I can explain," Sandra said as she hugged him. Christian cracked open the door and peeked out. They all turned and looked towards the door. Sandra, why are you harboring these creatures? Fredrick replied as he stared with his upper lip slightly curled at Jeanette and Christian. Don't call my sister a creature, Sandra replied with disdain as she handed Jeanette the suit for Christian. She is not your sister anymore, he snapped back. Yes, she is, Fredrick. Let me explain. Explain? What is there to explain? She's a vampire, he answered with disgust. Yes, I know, but Fredrick, please, let's go somewhere so we can talk, Sandra begged. Fredrick looked at Kristen and Jeanette, and he shook his head back and forth with shame. I'm sorry, Jeanette, but you have to. And before he could say another word, Sandra put her hand over his mouth. Fredrick, please. Sandra looked back at Jeanette and smiled at her, and she walked out of the room with Fredrick and shut the door behind them. They hurried and walked up to the top deck of the ship. Once they reached the bow, Fredrick asked, What in God's name are you doing, Sandra? You know this is against the orders and laws and blasphemy against the light. She's my sister, my blood. I love her, Sandra declared. If you love her, your sister, then do her the ultimate right. Kill her and put her to rest, he demanded. No, Fredrick. You know the damned can't find peace in death. I have to save her from this curse. She grabbed his hand and squeezed it. Sandra, you can't save her from the curse. It's too late. She's already damned. She was the moment she was bitten. Who is the other creature? Fredrick wrinkled his brow. His name is Christian, and he's not a creature. He's a young man that Jeanette found on this ship. He's innocent, too. She brought him to me so I could help him. You can't help them. You can't let them live, Sandra. I can't believe that you would let a vampire live after what happened to Sarnia. He tried to get her to see the things his way. Please don't, Fredrick, she cried. Tears ran down her face. Fredrick reached in his coat pocket and handed her a handkerchief. Why do you even think you can help them? Fredrick, I know more now than I did then, where magic is concerned. And that is how Sarnia wanted to die. It was her choice. Even though I did all that she asked, she will never be at rest until I can give her back her soul. I have to find Akashi. It's the only thing that can save my sister and bring peace to Sarnia and to all of the other damned that are damned by the dark curse. No, Sandra, the book is too powerful for someone as young as you, he said as he grabbed her shoulders. Sarnia told me about the contract. She believed in it. The book can cure this curse. Fredrick, please understand. I need to save my sister. Her heart is good and her soul is pure, just as it was before she was bitten. Sandra lowered her voice and leaned into him and whispered, and I know that you're in search of Akashi, too. How do you know that? Fredrick replied with surprise. Because that is why you left, and you talk in your sleep. Sandra replied with a smile on her face. He paused for a moment. That still does not change the fact that you're not powerful enough to will the contract. We would be together, Sandra replied. Fredrick looked into Sandra's emerald eyes. She's still the most beautiful woman that he's ever known. How can he argue with such beauty? She has always been able to change his mind, but he still did not agree with her. Okay, Sandra, I will help you look for Akashi. I love you. I have since the first day you came to work at the theater. I love you too, Fredrick, and I always will. Please, Fredrick, stay with me. Help me. He caressed her cheek and he pulled her close and kissed her. He put his forehead to hers and told her, I can't save the one thing that I hate the most in this world. Fredrick turned to walk away. Sandra grabbed his arm and asked him loudly, Why? He turned around and took her hand, and he walked her over to a bench and sat down. Then he proceeded to tell her his reason. When Fredrick was only 9, vampires slaughtered his whole entire family. Vampires made him an orphan. If he had been home, they would have killed him too. They took everything that he loved from this world in one night, and now they were doing it again, because Sandra is the only woman he has ever loved. Sandra, I do love you, but I took an oath. I gave myself to the light. I came here because I knew something had gone wrong when I couldn't see you anymore. Tears ran down Sandra's face as she listened to Fredrick. When I saw Raphael bring Jeanette home, I could see her bite. After that, everything went black. And that's when I knew that you'd put a spell on yourself and to keep the vampires from finding you and her. He told her that he hurried back to England as soon as he could, and that when he found Senner with no memories of her or Jeanette, he knew that what she had done for him to save his life. So he took him somewhere safe, a place where he would never be questioned by the vampires again. He didn't want her to be alone when she had to end her sister's life. So he followed her scent to the cabin and to the shipyard, and that's when he knew they had left for America. Sandra, I came back for you. I was going to ask you to marry me. He slid down from the bench and got on his knees as tears ran down his face. Oh, Fredrick, please, I need you. I love you, Sandra told him as she cried and squeezed his hand. I finally find you, and this is what you're doing. You're making a big mistake, he responded with sadness. Sandra sobbed and shook her head. He stood up to leave. Sandra looked up at him, sobbing. Fredrick, I'm sorry that vampires killed your family. I'm so sorry. Please don't go, she begged him. When this quest turns you dark, I will have no choice but to kill you, Sandra. And he turned and left Sandra sitting on the bench, crying. Thank you for joining me as I read this part of my book, and I hope that you'll